I decided to do a video focusing on the legacy media's response to the terror attack in Manhattan yesterday. As you might expect, their take is basically pure apologetics focusing on Muslims without any kind of criticism of Islam whatsoever. Now, just to lay it on the table, I don't have a problem with Muslims in general. I do have a big problem with Islam. I consider it to be a terrorist ideology, flat out. As I see it, the basic tenets of Islam boil down to lie to the infidels if it furthers the cause of Islam, and kill the infidels who won't convert or you have a problem with in general. Yes, Muslims kill Muslims at a higher rate than Westerners, but tell that to the people of Boston, of San Bernardino, of Orlando, and now of Manhattan. Tell it to them and see how much that takes away their pain and their suffering and their longing for their loved ones. Leave it to the legacy media to completely gloss over this and worry about how people will negatively react to Muslims in general. To hell with pointing out the dangers that Islam carries to the West and for the fanatical followers who revel in taking out as many non-believers as they can by any means necessary. These stories that I'm presenting will give you a pretty good look at just how the corporate media completely scrubs any kind of Islamic ideology from these attacks and instead buries the lead with poor Muslims and things of that nature. Before we get to all that, though, there's a story that just came down the wire from the AP that I must include. It seems that a second man is being sought in connection with this attack. This is from the AP. The FBI is looking for information on a second man in connection with the deadly truck attack on a bike path near the World Trade Center. The Bureau on Wednesday issued a poster saying it is seeking the public's help with information about 32-year-old Mokham Odzior Kadyrov. The poster doesn't say why investigators want to know more about the man. The poster says he was born in Uzbekistan. So was 29-year-old Saifullo Saipov, who was charged Wednesday with providing material support to a terrorist group and violence and destruction of motor vehicles. Authorities say he drove the truck down the path intentionally, killing 8 people. Investigators recovered a cell phone that had Islamic State group propaganda. I just now received a second update to this story. The FBI says that man has been found. They are not saying anything else in regards to that. I'll keep an eye on this, and if an update is required, I'll do so later on. Now we come to the articles showing the predictable nature of corporate media as it relates to any terror attack in the U.S. This is from a Daily Caller article yesterday. CNN's Jake Tapper calls Allahu Akbar beautiful after terrorist attack. CNN anchor Jake Tapper called the Islamic phrase Allahu Akbar beautiful minutes after reports of a terrorist attack in New York City Tuesday on The Lead. Tapper was interviewing CNN's crime and justice reporter, I can't pronounce that name, when he chimed in to give his opinion on the nature of the terrorist chant. Quote, "The Arabic chant Allahu Akbar, God is great, sometimes said under the most beautiful of circumstances, and too often we hear of it being said in moments like this." Okay, well, sometimes versus too often. Which do you think more readily comes to mind, Jake? Perhaps we know it really well because of all the times it's said during terrorist attacks. This is also from the Daily Caller, came out yesterday evening. MSNBC panelist Allahu Akbar New York City terror attack was, quote, anti-Islamic. MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance stated Tuesday that the suspected Islamist terror attack in New York City was an anti-Islamic attack. Nance stated, "It is evil. What it is you're seeing, the physical manifestation of a cult ideology. And what you're seeing is not Islam whatsoever. None of this is condoned, including the sacrificing and getting yourself killed at the end of a terrorist attack. None of that is Islamic. It's anti-Islamic. And what you're seeing is these people have created a belief system in which mass murder, as we saw on 9/11, and as we've seen all throughout the Middle East, they kill more Muslims than anybody else." He added, "Murder is their act of worship, and that's just cultism. and there's virtually no way to stop it once it gets in the mind of one individual, unless he enunciates it or communicates it electronically. Okay, first of all, anti-Islamic? Are you out of your fucking mind? I know Nance is an idiot. I mean, seriously, if you watch any of his segments on MSNBC, he is the epitome of a fully functioning retard. He thinks that he predicted the entire Trump-Russia scandal, even though there is no scandal. You should see Joy Reid fawn all over him during their segments together. It's as if he's some kind of god. In actuality, he's a guy who wrote a book about pure make-believe. Somehow he gets away with making people believe what he wrote is the actual truth. It's insane. And now he comes on as their security guy and talks about Islam in completely the opposite way that it is practiced. Islam is death. He says right here, I'm sorry, the kitten's playing with the cords to the blinds. He says, in his own words, he says, they kill more Muslims than anybody else. So right there, Islam is murder. You just said it. You can't keep your narrative straight from one fucking sentence to another. And this guy is supposed to be an expert. Typical corporate media bullshit regarding Islam. On one hand, it's the religion of peace. That phrase is not from anyone who has studied Islam in the least. Trust me. And then he says more Muslims die from Islam than Westerners. So it's not peaceful. Once again, we're not supposed to worry about murder in the US. We're not supposed to worry about murder in Europe because more Muslims die because of terrorism. So that washes out all Western deaths. Until Western deaths equal Muslim deaths, well then maybe we can talk about it. You fucking retard. And the last sentence, unless he enunciates it or communicates it electronically. Guess what, Nance? These people do enunciate it. They do communicate it electronically. But they use private chat rooms. They talk to their friends, who are fellow Muslims, fellow Islamists, who are not going to tell anyone what this guy is saying because they either don't care or they condone it completely. They want these acts of terror to happen. When you talk to their friends who say, oh, he's a nice guy, he's never said or done anything that would make me think he's radicalized, that's a bunch of bullshit. That's taqiyya, lying to the non-believers, lying to the non-Muslims because it furthers the cause of Islam. But you don't see it that way. You're the security expert. That somehow goes right past you. Fuck you. Here's the last one, and the story that you have to expect after every terror attack in the West. Muslim Americans again braced for backlash after New York attack. Good old corporate media, right on cue. Umar Ahmad, a 43-year-old Muslim American physician from New Jersey, was in his Trenton office when he heard that a rented pickup truck had deliberately driven down a bike path in Lower Manhattan, killing 8 people and injuring about a dozen more. My initial reaction was obviously concern and shock over what happened, Ahmad told NBC News. And then, basically, I was wondering if it was a Muslim who did it. I'll bet that came as a real shock to you, Ahmad. A complete knocking you over with a feather shock. The suspect was identified as an Uzbek immigrant named Saifullah Saipov, 29, who entered the United States in 2010, law enforcement officials said. Saipov hopped out of the truck and shouted Allahu Akbar, or God is great, before firing a BB gun or pellet gun, 4 senior law enforcement sources said. Law enforcement sources said he left a note in the truck claiming he committed the attack for the Islamic State terrorist group. A police officer on patrol in the area opened fire, hitting the suspect in the abdomen and ending what New York Mayor Bill de Blasio called an act of terror. Ahmad's question was answered. My biggest concern is that he's readily identified as a Muslim, and then that is extrapolated out to my own faith. Well, how could it not be, Ahmed? I mean, seriously. You follow Islam, and Islam says, kill the infidels. It's right there in black and white. Muhammad passed that down from Allah himself. Maybe you should be more concerned about whether or not your Iron Age cult is good for you. Maybe you should consider backing something else. Even Christianity. I'm an atheist. I don't care. But perhaps you should think about a faith that actually helps people, that doesn't commit terror all over the world, that kills more of your own kind than it even does in the West, and it's having a field day in the West. Maybe you should be thinking about that. In the wake of Tuesday's attack, some Muslim Americans and community leaders expressed concerns over how their religion would be perceived and whether Muslims would become targets of violence. There has been a history of, sort of, blowback, and that's obviously going to be something people think about, said Ali Najmi, a board member of the Muslim Democratic Club of New York. But the primary concern is usually, and is now, how we can best lend ourselves in this time of crisis. Okay, that's better. But maybe you should concern yourself more with getting your community to turn these type of people in once they start showing signs of radicalization. Maybe that would be better than trying to help after the fact of these constantly occurring terror attacks. Najmi predicted that Muslim American groups would organize around ways to help those affected by Tuesday's attack. Their primary concern is about how we can be helpful and how we can help the victims and people in crisis. Afaf Nasher, executive director of the New York chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, said the action and attitude that Muslim Americans must take were ones of continued service. Service to what needs to be done for, number one, those that are attacked, but also in general for the general community. From our perspective as Muslim Americans, we are just incredibly heartbroken, Nasher added. And just thinking about the senseless blood that was spilled and thinking about the families who are now in mourning, it's difficult to even talk. Ahmad, the physician, said he's worried about backlash every time an attack like Tuesday's happens. But I feel I'm more worried about what the response from political leadership would be. Wow, just going right to yourself. Maybe the response from political leadership should be, keep these people out of the fucking country. The Manhattan attacker got into the U.S. through the now discontinued diversity visa program. That allowed 50,000 visa applicants to come into the U.S. for basically no other reason than they won a lottery. They didn't have to have a skill set that would be beneficial to the U.S. They basically got in with hardly any background checks whatsoever. It was a free-for-all. And you know who backed that bill? You know who brought it to Congress? Chuck Schumer, the guy whose constituents are lying dead and broken because of this attack. Now, the diversity visa program isn't around anymore because it doesn't need to be. Schumer and the Gang of Eight opened up an entirely new series of immigration avenues. They allowed that number to increase from basically 50,000 lottery winners to millions of immigrants. And does Schumer think this is a problem? Does Schumer think that maybe that wasn't such a good idea? No, he still backs it completely. He thinks it was a great idea, that it's done no harm. Complete ideologue, completely out of touch with reality. If I were a New Yorker and I heard Schumer talking about things this way, I would be incensed. I'm not saying immigration is bad in general, but I am saying there are certain people who do not belong in this country, and those are people who have a belief system that is an anathema to U.S. and Western democracy, to the Republic as it stands. Linda Sarsour, I'm looking at you. Ahmad said he had seen the Muslim American community change since the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, the deadliest on U.S. soil. Ever since 9/11, we've become much less insular, he said. We're more prone to reaching out and letting people know who we are and basically trying to create those connections in our communities. Yeah, like Linda Sarsour, who's screaming for Sharia law to be introduced into the U.S., for it to become the law of the land. That's the kind of reaching out we need. Thanks, Ahmad. That's been a real important bridge to try to at least mitigate some of the misconceptions and consequences of those misconceptions. I'm sorry, Ahmad. The more you learn about Islam, the less likely you are to believe the bullshit that comes from the Muslim community. It's taqiyya, like I said, the right to lie to the non-believers in order to further the cause of Islam. Nasher said there were ways to combat the negative image often associated with Islam. We as Muslims carry the responsibility to show what we say and what we preach, and that's something we do every day. Ahmad gave some simple advice. Get to know a Muslim in your community, and maybe then you might have a different opinion. I might have a different opinion of an individual Muslim, but I'm never going to have a different opinion about Islam, and Muslims follow Islam. You got to get your shit together and decide what side of history you want to be on. An Iron Age mythology handed down by an illiterate caravan thief who was kicked out of his hometown? Or maybe something more helpful to society? I am tired of these bullshit articles about Muslim backlash after these insanely horrific terror attacks. It doesn't matter where it happens: Germany, Sweden, France, the Netherlands, Great Britain, the US. You can always count on these articles. And what's going to happen? There's going to be a rock thrown through somebody's window. There's going to be some graffiti sprayed on a mosque. Big fucking deal. 8 people are dead. Even if you don't count September 11th, dozens of Americans have died at the hands of Islam. Dozens. The religion of peace, my ass. These articles are pure masturbation for the Muslim community, and I'm sick to death of them. I wish for once the corporate media would take off the gloves and say, maybe you people need some more self-reflection. Maybe you need to come to an understanding about what's right and what's wrong. Fed up with this. There's a review of some of the articles put out by corporate media in the aftermath of this horrible attack. Instead of concentrating on the problem, they see it as an opportunity to, I want to use a very dirty phrase here, but I'm going to hold back, but they see it as a way to stroke the ego of the Muslim community, to make them feel better about themselves, when in fact they are at the root of a horrible problem in the world. Not just in the US, not just in Western Europe, in the entire world. This has to stop. ISIS is on its way out, that's great, but it's not going to stop the Muslim religion as a whole. It's not going to stop Islam. That is a deeply rooted ideology that is not going anywhere soon. All we can do is try to mitigate the problem, try to keep these people from getting radicalized in our own countries and taking it out on us. No, we can't kick out citizens. Muslim Americans don't have to worry about losing their citizenship. I hate when people start bringing that up as if it's a reality, and it's just not the case, folks. You're protected by the Constitution. That doesn't mean we have to let anybody else in, though. No one has the right to emigrate to another country. People talk about doing better vetting processes. There's a problem. Middle Eastern countries, Eastern European countries, places like Uzbekistan, they don't have electronic central records. You can't just call them up and say, hey, send me the file on Safulo or Bagra or anything like that. They don't have them. Vetting is a pipe dream for the most part. Personally, I think you just need to shut down Muslim immigration entirely. They are not helping the United States. They are not helping Europe. They are not helping their own homeland. They kill. Well, that's my rant for the day. I hope it gave you some insight into how the media tries to mollify the Muslim community instead of holding it to account. Thank you all for coming. Until next time, be well, and as always, thank you for your attention.